Welcome to the sew along for the Meadow diaper tote. This pattern is available on my Etsy shop for purchase. It's very roomy. It has elasticated pockets on the inside, a quilted pocket on the outside, and an optional canvas shoulder strap. To assemble the pattern, you want to print all of the pages. I like to cut the bottom and the right side of the margin off and then connect each alphabetical line, so A 1 through 4, B 1 through 4, and so on. Connect them widthwise first and then connect them all lengthwise. You'll line up the little triangles and tape them all together. This is how it should look at the end. Moving on to materials, first you need your main fabric. Today I'm using a pre-quilted fabric, so I don't have to do the quilting myself. This is also a great beginner option if you have a quilt or some quilted fabric. It makes it much easier than hand quilting. So this is my main and my batting, but if you are quilting yourself, you'll want a main fabric and then separate batting for the center, and then you'll want your lining for your quilting process. The optional shoulder strap will require some canvas webbing and hardware. You can find some options at Hobby Lobby. You just have to make sure that they match the width of your canvas and that you can find all the pieces you need in the same colors. Next, you need a fabric marker, again if you're self-quilting, 1/2 inch elastic for the interior pocket, and then of course some matching thread. Some other helpful tools of course are scissors, pins and measuring tape, and then a clear ruler if you're going to be quilting the fabric yourself. This is optional to create a sturdy base on the bottom of the bag. I did this with the blue gingham cherry pattern. It's called Sew In Stabilizer and I found it at Hobby Lobby. Starting with the self-quilting method, when you cut out your batting pieces, I like to add 1/2 inch of seam allowance. This is mostly because fabrics can shift a lot when quilting. When quilting, you will have 5 pieces you're quilting together: the front and back main, the 2 straps, and the front pocket. The front pocket is the only piece that has 3 layers to quilt together: the main, the batting, and the lining. Everything else is just the main and the batting. I have marked my quilting lines. I like a 45-degree angle in both directions, 1.5 inches apart. You can quilt any pattern you'd like: diamonds, a traditional square, or simple vertical lines. I'm going to begin quilting my exterior pocket piece, simply sewing along the lines that I used with my fabric marker. You will continue this pattern until all 5 pieces are quilted together. Here's my exterior pocket piece. I'm going to relay the paper pattern and cut away any excess. To finish the top edge of the exterior pocket, we are going to cover it with bias binding. For this, you will grab piece number 5, fold the short ends together until they meet in the center, and iron these down. And then you will fold it again lengthwise and iron again. This will create a nice clean top to the pocket. And then you will lay it on top of the exterior pocket piece to be sewn down. Moving forward, I'm going to be using my pre-quilted fabric. And again, the first step is the exterior pocket. Since my fabric is already quilted, I just need to apply the bias binding along the top edge of my pocket. I do this all in one go. You could attach the bias binding in a 2-step method where you attach it to the wrong side, then pull it to the good side, but I like to do it all in one go. You'll then place it on the front main piece, pin it in place, measure to find the center line. I'm going to create a few notches. It's about 8 3/4 inches. Connect that line and then sew the pocket on. Of course, you can make as many pocket separators as you'd like. I just want 2 front pockets. Now we'll grab the side bottom panel. There should be notches at the 1/2 inch mark on the right side of your fabric. We're going to line that up with the top edge of the main front and pin it along the right side. Just before we reach the bottom of the main panel, we're going to mark 1/2 inch away from the bottom. This is where we're going to stop and pivot. Pin up until that mark, and then we're going to take it to the sewing machine and sew with a 1/2 inch seam allowance from the top all the way down to that 1/2 inch mark. Being really careful to go over the pocket area. You can sew back and forth a few times there to make it a little stronger. Stopping at the 1/2 inch mark with a forward and back stitch. Trim your threads, and then we're going to take scissors and cut through. We're going to make a diagonal line towards that 1/2 inch mark. Being careful not to cut the threads we just made. So you will be cutting through 3 layers of fabric. I cut through the main, the exterior pocket, and the side bottom panel. This allows for the fabric to turn so we can pivot the corner. Now you're going to pin the side bottom panel along the bottom of the main, keeping in mind that the pocket is in between these 2 layers. Pin all along the bottom, and then we will start at this corner, making sure to pick up right where we left off. Sewing with 1/2 inch seam allowance, just like we did on the side. Just as we did before, we're going to stop 1/2 inch before we reach the edge, because we need to pivot again. Sew all the way until that 1/2 inch mark. We're going to cut diagonally again, right in the corner, towards our stitch line, and then pivot the side bottom panel. And we'll sew up the last side of our main front panel. Once we reach the end, this is what it should look like. We have the side bottom panel wrapped around all 3 of the main body edges. Now we will attach the back main panel in the same exact way. This side might feel a little bit different because the main panel is facing you, but you'll want to line it up with the 1/2 inch mark on that side panel, pinning all the way down the side, marking 1/2 inch from the bottom. And we'll sew with 1/2 inch seam allowance until we reach that 1/2 inch mark. I find this side to be a little easier. You're only cutting through 2 layers of fabric. Pivot the main panel and pin along the bottom side. You can see here that I'm checking my corner just to make sure that I caught everything. You can always go back and sew over this forward and back a few times just to stabilize this corner. Moving on with 1/2 inch seam allowance until I reach that 1/2 inch mark. Cut diagonally towards the thread, and then we'll pivot one last time. Alrighty guys, I have sewn the front and the back to the side bottom panel, but I made a bit of a mistake. You can see here that I have a little bit of excess on the side, which is purposeful, and then I have a little bit of excess here, then I have a lot of excess here, and I can see that I did not cut this square at a right angle. You can see it doesn't match up here. I have much more of the extra side panel, so I'm going to try to even that out as much as I can. That was definitely my mistake. I chose to cut the front and the back together and maybe just missed a little bit, but again, that is why I add a little bit of extra in these side panels, just in case you use a little more seam allowance than is necessary, or one of your corners is sharper than the other. There is a little bit of excess of the side panel, but I can clearly see that I did not cut this straight. So I'm going to try to fix that, and then we're going to do the exact same thing with the lining pieces. And similarly to the front, We're going to make the interior pocket first, which is elasticated. We will assemble that onto the front or the back, and then we're going to do the same method of the bottom side panel, attaching the front and the back. But first up, we will start with the interior pocket. I trimmed off the excess of the side bottom panel, and everything evened out pretty well. Moving on to the interior pocket. I am folding to the wrong side of the fabric, 1/4 of an inch and ironing down, and then measuring 3/4 of an inch towards the wrong side of the fabric to make the elastic casing. Iron this in place, and then we will sew this down. Directly after, we will make a gathering stitch along the bottom, sewing right along the edge to make the elastic casing. And then I will widen my stitch length, decrease my tension, and sew a gathering stitch without a forward and back stitch along the bottom of the pocket. Now it's time to pull on the strands and move the fabric until it is as narrow as our main panel. I'll pin this all along the bottom. You can pin both edges and do the gathering from there. Again, moving the fabric along the thread until it's sitting pretty evenly with the bottom edge of the main lining panel. Now we will cut our elastic and thread it through the elastic channel. I personally cut 15 inches long of elastic. I'm going to feed it through the channel. I want to make sure to pin one end so it doesn't pull all the way through. Give it a pull on both sides to evenly stretch it through, and then you'll pin it to each end of the main fabric. We're going to mark the center line and sew a dividing pocket straight down the center, making sure to stabilize at the top so this pocket stays really strong and secure. Now it's time to assemble the full lining tote. We'll grab the side bottom panel in the lining fabric and line it up right sides together, starting at the 1/2 inch notch. This will look very similar to the method we just used for the main panel. Pin everything in place, again stopping about a 1/2 inch before you reach the edge. Sew this down, making sure to stabilize that pocket piece in the elastic. Cut a diagonal line, pivot the side bottom panel, and pin along the bottom of the main panel. This part can be a touch tricky because you have your gathered pocket along the bottom, but just take it slow and know that you can rearrange those little folds and gathers as you go. Just make sure to catch that pocket in between the side bottom panel and the main body piece. Making sure to catch the very corner. I have a lot of threads to trim away. And now we're sewing the last side. Starting at the corner, make sure to stabilize that pocket. Now it's time to attach the back lining piece. Starting at the 1/2 inch notch, right sides together. This should be the easiest one to assemble as there are no pockets in the way, making sure to stop at that 1/2 inch mark. Pivot, sew the bottom, pivot again, and sew the last side. And then you have your whole lining piece complete. Make sure to trim off any excess from your side bottom panel that could be hanging over the top. And then it's time to make the ties. I am making bias ties, so ironing 2 edges of the long side together. Fold it in half again and iron down. To give one edge a nice clean finish, we're going to fold the right sides together and sew down. I trimmed off the excess, and then we'll turn it right side out. I'm using my seam gauge to kind of poke that corner out, make it a little bit more crispy and clean. And then we can sew down the long edge. Trim your threads, and we have one of our ties done. Repeat this step for the second tie. Moving on to the straps. I'm using my self-quilted fabric, of course. If you've quilted your own, you will fold it in half, place it right sides together, and pin all along the length. I'm going to sew with 1/2 inch seam allowance down the strap. Trim off any excess seam allowance to make it easier to turn inside out. There are plenty of methods for turning inside out. I just like to use my hands. I find my looper threader is not really sufficient in doing this. You could use a pen tool. I just like to practice my patience and do it manually. Once it's turned inside out, the strap is complete. You can take it to the ironing board and give it a good press. Now it's the fun part. It's time to assemble and attach all of our straps. We have all our materials laid out, the lining and the mane. If you choose to do the canvas strap, I cut 2 4-inch pieces of the canvas webbing, and I will place my D-rings on both straps. Now it's time to mark on the right side where all the straps will go. I'm marking the center of the main panel, and then 4 inches from each edge is where I like my straps to go. I'm marking the center of the side panel. This is where our D-rings will go, and I will pin this one in place, right in the center of the side bottom panel. Now attaching the raw end or the unfinished end of our tie to the right side of the bag, pin it to that center mark that you made. Taking the straps, pin them to the 4-inch mark that you made from each edge of the main panel. I like to make sure that my straps are facing the right way. We'll do the same thing for the other D-ring. Pin in place on the right side. Place the raw unfinished edge of our tie in the center and the straps on the 4-inch marks. Now it's time to take our lining, which is turned inside out, and place the main bag inside of the lining, right sides together. We will then start to pin at all 4 corners where our side seams meet our main panels. I'm going to put a clip here as this part is a little bulky where the canvas webbing is. Pin over all the straps, and generally along the entire top edge of the bag. Should be looking something like this. Before we take it to the machine, we need to leave a gap for turning it inside out. I chose to make this gap just inside of one of the D-rings and one of the main straps. The gap should be large enough to fit your hand through. Now it's time to take it to the machine and sew it all together. Sewing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I'm starting right at one of my quilted straps. Sewing slowly all the way around the bag, doubling back over some of the portions with the straps that I want to really stabilize and make really secure. I'm going to stop sewing right after the D-ring, leaving this large gap for turning the bag inside out. Reach in and pull the main bag so it's right side out. Definitely take your time and do this slowly. Your stitching should be very stable and strong, but it's always best to go slow and be gentle. Now it's really starting to come together. It's time to take this to the ironing board, and I'm going to iron the top edge, making sure that the lining's sitting inside of the bag. I don't necessarily want mine to show on the outside, so I'm ironing the top edge and making sure the lining is sitting inside of the bag. Now it's time to make our seam to close up the gap. You should have about 1/2 inch of seam allowance, which gives it a nice folded edge that we can sew together, and you won't even be able to tell that this gap was here in the first place. Pin the gap closed. I'm going to add some extra pins all around the top of the bag, and then we will top stitch. We'll sew as close to the folded edge as we can. This also helps to stabilize all of our straps, which is just a bonus. Sew as close to the edge as you can. Make sure that all the straps are pulled up and away from the bag so you're not sewing them down. Go slowly and carefully. This is one of your last steps. And again, feel free to double over any of the straps to make those areas a little stronger. And the bag is done. Now it's time to assemble the hardware if you choose to make the shoulder strap. You'll take your canvas webbing, 2 swivel hooks in your tri-glide, and send the tri-glide through the canvas webbing. You're going to attach it to one end of the canvas. Fold about 1/2 inch down and 1.5 inches over. Pin in place and sew 2 lines to secure this webbing. Now it's time to take one of the swivel hooks, send it through the canvas, and then send the end of the canvas webbing through the tri-glide, sending it through an open end and then back over the webbing. Pull it until the swivel hook is sitting closer to the tri-glide. This will be your adjustable end, where you can make the strap shorter or longer. On the other end of the canvas webbing, we will install the other swivel hook, similarly to how we did the tri-glide. This one will stay in place. Fold 1/2 inch down, fold over the metal bar, about 1 inch or 1.5 inches, and sew 2 lines to keep this webbing in place. Feel free to sew as many lines as you want. Go back and forth a few times to make this really sturdy. And now your shoulder strap is complete. You can attach it to the bag. And your bag is complete. Go ahead and fill it up with all your baby necessities. It should hold quite a bit. I hope this bag was fun for you to make. If you run into any trouble, please email me at hello@mindful-may.com.